Hi everyone, it's Josh with Talk About Trek, and we are back again with another wonderful novel by A.C. Crispin, Star Trek Sarek. And just finished this one yesterday, and this was a fantastic book. Uh, this was published in 1994, and the story is set basically right after Star Trek 6. And it was kind of a funny coincidence, is before I started reading this, I'd actually finished watching that. So it kind of led perfectly into this. So, of course, Star Trek Sarek is about Sarek, among other things, but it dives into the backstory of Spock's father, Sarek, his relationship with Amanda, and then gets into a whole lot more than that. Normally I would go into a lot of detail, but if I did that too much with this book, this would be like an hour-long video. So we'll skim over the most of the things, but we'll try to hit the major plot points as we go along. So let's start by reading the back here. Star Trek Sarek. Sarek? Amanda called out softly. Spock sat by his mother's bedside, holding her small, cold-wasted hand in both his own, as though he could somehow transfer some of his strength to her by doing so. The room was bathed in sunlight, and the monitoring devices were subdued, non-intrusive. As Spock watched his mother, her lips parted, and she spoke. Barely more than a breath escaped, a breath that was a name. Sarek? She had been calling his father's name for hours, and the sound of it wrenched Spock's heart as nothing in his life had ever had. I am here, Mother. I am here. Spock, I am here with you, Mother. She opened her eyes again, stared vacantly at him, fretfully. She tugged her hand away from his. Sarek, she murmured, turning her head on the pillow, seeking someone who wasn't there. So, boy, this book has a lot of twists and turns. And as you can see, I had to take copious notes to keep up with the copious twists and turns that were happening here. But let's dive right in. The book basically starts on Vulcan with Sarek contemplating something going on. There's some mystery that he is working on, something that he has got to do, some plot that he is uncovering. And as he's doing that, you can kind of see that something is going on with his wife, Amanda. So then they jump to Earth, the Vulcan embassy on Earth, and there's kind of a mob outside. And it's this group of humans called the KEHL, the Keep Earth Human League. And they are they want all, just basically keep Earth is for humans, all of the off-worlders need to get off. So they're there at the Vulcan embassy saying, Vulcans go home, basically. Sarek is there as well. He's there at the embassy to just kind of get some information. He's tracking down some more information on his little plot. But while he's there, he decides he's going to go out and he's going to talk to these people. So he actually walks right out the front gate, walks into the mob, and tries to have a conversation with their leader, this Induna. And Sarek does have a kind of a attaché that works with him and helps him. His name is Saran. So they walk out together, and they are kind of attacked by this mob. And they're able to get away with some quick Vulcan neck pinches, and then Starfleet finally beams in some security. But in doing this, he kind of gets in a spat with the leader, touches him, and realizes that there's some kind of mind control going on here. So there's something more going on than just these humans' actions. They're being influenced from elsewhere, which kind of ties into what he's been thinking, this overall overarching story that's been going on. So then they kind of talk about the Freelands. So the Freelands are this race of people that are very mysterious. No one has ever seen them. Anytime they've met with someone, they're basically shrouded with these big giant robes and the full face covering and everything. And no one has ever seen them. And they typically come with like a Vulcan attaché to help them with their dealings. So this particular Freeland that they introduce us to, his name is Terran, and he has this attaché named Saval. So then it jumps over now to a whole nother character, Peter Kirk. So that's not at all talked about here on the back, but Peter Kirk is in this. So Peter Kirk is George Kirk's, or Sam Kirk's son. So that is, of course, Captain Kirk's brother. And I guess he was in the episode Operation Annihilate, I believe, and as like a young kid. But I don't think I've ever seen that one. So that is on my recommended viewing, definitely to catch up. Because Peter Kirk is actually like one of the main characters of this book. So interesting, and it was kind of a twist I wasn't expecting, and it started off a little weird, but it actually went into like a really good place. So Peter Kirk is actually he's in Starfleet right now. He's 32 years old, but he's a cadet still. He's just kind of taking a while to figure out what he wants to do, and he's possibly thinking about being a diplomat. So he would like to get a meeting with Sarek. So he heads down to the Vulcan embassy at the same time as this ride is going on, and gets kind of caught up in this, and basically the security thinks he's one of the rioters. So he's kind of caught up in the escape, trying to not get hurt, and gets caught up with the members of this group of this KEHL, and kind of now figures, well, hey, I can be an inside man and learn some more information about this. So then it goes back to another scene where they have a nice scene on. They go back to Sarek basically, and this is just the first two chapters. We're not even. Wait, this is the first chapter. We're not even out of the first chapter yet, and this much has already happened here. But now we go back to Sarek, who is left the Vulcan embassy and is on his basically his diplomatic mission to the Freeland Embassy, which is a star base above the planet. They never let anyone visit their planet. So there at the embassy, he plays some 3D chess with Terran, and it's revealed that in his suspicion that Freelands are actually Romulans in disguise. Dun dun dun. So yeah, there's your twist, and that's just chapter 1. And look, we're already at 6 minutes, if you can believe it. So chapter 2, we're gonna switch gears again. We're jumping to some Klingons. So we're gonna go to Kronos here, and we have Camarang and Karg and Valdir. So these are our Klingon characters on Kronos. A secret meeting underground. Camarang is upset with the current chancellor, the Klingon chancellor, and is basically trying to lead a rebellion against her, and to lead an attack against the Federation. And he particularly hates James Kirk because one of Camarang's, I think, sons or whatever, was one of the ones who died in Star Trek 6, I believe. Or it could have been Star Trek 4. Anyway, he doesn't like him. He doesn't like Kirk. And he has a niece named Valdir, whose, I think, father is the one that died. So I guess it was his brother. But she is kind of like the heroine character portrayed here. And she seems like a very honorable Klingon, while most of these other ones that they're showing do not have a lot of honor. And she has been betrothed to this Karg, who's a complete scumbag. So right off the bat, you don't like Karg. So lots of pieces to this book already so far. You've got Sarek and his plot. You've got Peter Kirk and what's going on with him. And now you've got the Klingons and Valdir. So you've got all these 3 different pieces here. Now, and we're about 67 pages into the book here, and we finally get to the Enterprise. And the Enterprise is on a medical mission to one of these planets that's been affected by these Klingon raids that have been happening. So these kind of rogue groups of Klingons, not endorsed by the government, have been going out and raiding these Federation colonies. And now the Enterprise is at one of these colonies, kind of attending to them, when they get the news, or Spock rather gets the news that his mother is ill, and it's kind of more than everyone thought. It's not just an illness. In fact, she is dying. So he leaves the Enterprise to return to Vulcan, and then you get a nice little scene as well in this, and this is still just chapter 2. Another scene, Peter kind of hiding out with the KEHL people, ingratiating himself with them more, smooching their leader, get a little bit of smooching in there, and another scene as well, very nice scene with Spock and Amanda spending some time in their garden on Vulcan. So at this time, Spock, we're in chapter 3 already. All right, so Spock gets to Vulcan, but then they switch over to this colony where one of these rogue Klingons is attacking. So the rogue Klingon that's attacking, his name is Karez, and he is actually one that has seemingly a little bit of honor. So he kind of stops his people from murdering and all that kind of stuff, without any reason. And so that's the little scene of like this Klingon raid on this colony. I think it's maybe an Orion colony. But they successfully raid it. They take it over, and they've taken everybody there hostages. and wow, this book has a lot going on. There's a very nice scene after that where Spock and Amanda sit down, and this is where they know that she's dying, and she wants to know what death is like, and she asks Spock because Spock has actually died. So it's a very cool little conversation that they have where Spock is kind of describing what it was like to him to die, and it kind of brings her a little bit of peace after they talk. So then they're going to go back to Peter Kirk, and he tries to expose what he learned to Starfleet security, and he's not quite taken seriously. He sends a message to his Uncle James, saying, this is what I found out, but I'm not getting taken seriously. Maybe you can do something with it. Sarek is called away at this time when his Amanda is just getting worse and worse and worse, but it's his job to do the negotiation to free this planet that Karaz has taken over, and free these hostages. And it's duty, and even though he knows that basically once he leaves, there's a good chance that she's going to die while he's gone, he has to do it anyway. So he goes. And Spock is so mad. Spock gets so mad at him. But he does his duty, and I think that Amanda realizes that that's what he had to do too. So that is just like the end of Chapter 3. Well, the actual end of Chapter 3 is old Peter Kirk goes down a dark alley and gets bum rushed by a couple of guys and gets kidnapped. So, bum, bum, bum. There we go. We're going further down the road here. So, the negotiations on Deneb 4 with Karaz are going well. It looks like everything's going good when one of his lieutenants goes crazy and starts attacking Sarek. So, you get a little bit of a fight scene. They're able to subdue the guy, and in the process, Sarek touches him and realizes that these Klingons too are under the same kind of mind control that affected the humans on Earth that he touched. So the mystery deepens. There's more mind control going on. Now, all during this story, they're kind of interspacing this with this little bit of snippets from Amanda's journal. Before Sarek left, Amanda said, please read these journals. So it's kind of they're fitting that in within the book, or she's fitting that in within the book, I should say. And it gives like awesome little tidbits into the past of like their relationship, important moments, and like Spock's life. So that, I think, was one of the very cooler parts about this book, was just seeing that, and the transition that they used to go back to that, or she used, was very well done. So after they subdue the Klingon and they realize that they're kind of under some kind of mind control, the negotiations, of course, are successful. They're able to leave all the hostages, but it's too late. They're successful too late. Amanda is quickly dying. Sarek's not going to make it back in time, and he reaches out to her as best he can telepathically, but he's not sure if he was able to reach her. So you get this very touching scene here in Chapter 4 where she passes away. Spock steps out into the garden and sits down, and a single tear rolls down his cheek and falls into the dust. Very well done. Sarek gets back home. They have a memorial for Amanda. And then from there they decide that they have to... So kind of that part of the story kind of finishes, and then the story seems to kind of pick up with more action and kind of on that kind of pace. So, they're back on the Enterprise. Sarek, Spock, everybody's now in on the conspiracy, trying to figure out who is influencing all these people, who is in charge of all this mind control, what does it have to do with the Freelands, the Romulans, what is going on. So back to Peter Kirk, he is actually captured by Camarang. So this is Camarang's idea of how he's going to get revenge on Kirk. He's going to torture Peter Kirk in front of him and then kill him. So he is going to ransom him, basically, try to get Kirk to come there, and then enact his very evil plan. So this guy's kind of like classically evil guy here. So during this time, Peter Kirk meets Valdir, and maybe a little bit of spark of something happens. So uh, they spend the next kind of chapter expanding upon that a little bit more, where they spend a little bit of time with Valdir and Peter getting to know each other, maybe a little bit of like Stockholm Syndrome kind of stuff going on. They also expand more now upon Wing Commander Terran. So they kind of go now, they're going straight from the point of view of this supposed Freeland, who is now revealed to be a Romulan in disguise. And they give you kind of a point of view of within his mind and these strange dreams he has of running down these halls, you know. Um, More great stuff, like I said, of Amanda's journal, which I won't get into too much because there's just so much that you could go into here. Great scene between Kirk and Sarek, where Kirk tries to kind of explain, Spock and how Spock feels and his side of it, just to kind of get everybody back on the same page. So, um, okay, so now we're about halfway through the book, maybe a little bit more. I think we're in chapter 7 here, and this is where we get. I love this. So this is where I knew, and I kind of knew this from before, just from reading A.C. Crispin's other books, Yesterday's Sun, Time for Yesterday. When I was reading the books, I kind of had this sense of like I was reading Edgar Rice Burroughs. And in chapter 7, one of the characters actually makes a quote of how the villain here, Camarang, sounds like he's straight out of an Edgar Rice Burroughs book, this kind of over-the-top villain language. So once I read that, I was like, yes, I knew it. So she definitely was a Burroughs fan, at least in my mind. It comes forward in her writing, I could see. So, whew, my throat is getting dry, and we are only a little bit over halfway through this thing. But they have a plan. So first, Peter and Valdir, they're developing a plan. She kind of realizes that she doesn't want to do what her uncle Camarang wants her to do, which is some kind of horrendous death torture. She's not really down for that. She wants to do the more honorable thing. So she's going to try to figure out a way that she can get them out of there. So they're developing some kind of plan. So Karg is a scumbag, and I think that during the kind of time that Peter interacts with Karg while she's there, she kind of sees and realizes his, how much better he is than Karg is, but that's just putting it mildly. I did want to read this wonderful quote that I found, and this is by Saval on page 275, and it stuck out to me, so I wrote it down. War is an unconscionable waste of resources, and the most illogical of tactics. There are no winners in war, only losers. The innocent pay, and the guilty grow ever richer and ever greedier. Violence breeds violence, and the cycle of avarice and corruption is nearly impossible to break. There is no excuse for a civilized being to resort to war. There are always alternatives to bloodshed. Man, heck yes. So, I love that. That was wonderful. Peace all the time. Peace, please. So, back to the book. Chapter 8. Now we're getting into the fun. You're getting your Kirk, Spock, and Bones rescue mission. They decide that they've got a little bit of time ahead of Camarang. So, since they have a little bit of time before the meetup or whatever, they're going to take a shuttle to Kronos, and they are going to rescue Peter. But Peter and Valdir aren't going to wait for the rescue. So chapter 8 is really when things get crazy. So if you want to sit down and just read one chapter out of this book, I would pick 8. So much happens in this. I think it was like a 60 page long chapter. So you get a couple of things here. Kirk, Spock, and Bones taking the shuttle to Kronos. And of course, they crash land. They're trying to get there quietly without being seen. They try to go through some of the asteroids, which are the remains of Praxis. A little bit of problem there, and they crashed. So they're going down to the planet. They land. Luckily, they're able to crash land fairly close to the little complex where he's being held, maybe about 6 miles or so. But they're on the ground. They got no way out, and they got to go rescue Peter. So now we're going to jump back to Peter and Valdir, and they're escaping now. And Valdir kind of knows this area, and there's these secret tunnels, so they escape down into these secret tunnels. And of course, there's a little bit of time for making a little bit of Klingon love in the tunnels. So they do, even in this action-packed chapter, there's a little bit of time for that. They make sure they can get that in there. So they escape from the tunnels, and they're making their way towards this, towards the port, basically, so they can steal a ship and get the heck out of there. Kirk, Spock, and Bones, using their tricorder, have kind of pinpointed where he's at, realizing that he's not waited to be rescued and has rescued himself, Valdir, and they head towards where he's at, towards the port, to meet up with him. So they hijack a vehicle in order to do that, and Kirk asks if he can drive, and Spock says no. He's going to take over, remembering what happened when we were on the Iosian planet. So they drive to the port, and they get there, and it's one of those classic mistaken identity things. So Peter and Valdir are there, and this car comes screaming up, and they're like, oh my god, we're caught. It's Camarang and the crew, and they're here, and they're getting ready to just go out fighting and start shooting them. And then Peter's looking closer and closer at him, and then finally, like, Spock turns around and he recognizes his face, and he's like, oh, hold up. And they meet up. And so without much action or anything there, the five of them are kind of joined back up together. But now the action really comes. So they do find a ship that they can escape on, a ship that has cloaks, so they can get off the planet safely. And but right at the time they realize they found their ship, they've been found out. So Camarang, Karg, and gang, or I think it's just Karg, and a bunch of Klingons are there. They're charging towards the thing, and seeing that there's kind of one chance to escape, Valdir leads some other Klingons that are there in a fight against Karg coming at them. So they go towards battle and they fight, but in the midst of the battle, she is caught. And she is stabbed. Awful. So she's stabbed, but it gives this really great scene there too, where because you get this, I think classic. Like I say, I knew that she was a fan of Burroughs because this seems like just something out of like Princess of Mars. So she's stabbed, and then Peter Kirk goes crazy with rage, and you have this awesome Klingon honor battle where he basically steps up and says, you know, you've killed my woman. You stabbed my woman, I challenge you to a battle, you know, and he fights it out with Karg, and he wins. It's just a fantastically written fight scene, and this is all like in one chapter, and it just goes from boom, 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 boom. Dr. McCoy gets in there, and he's able to redeem himself, and even though she is seriously wounded, he's able to stabilize her. They get to the escape vehicle, which is called the Taj, which means dagger in Klingon, and they're able to escape. So, wow, this book just goes on. It's crazy. So the rescue mission is a success. They are back on the Enterprise, and Terran is basically enacting his final plan. So Camarang and his group of rogues are out to attack the Federation, and as soon as that happens, kind of Terran and the Romulans will come in and mop things up, and then that's their grand plan. But they didn't expect Sarek. Sarek has figured the whole thing out. So basically what happens here is Sarek sends a message out because he knows that Terran is out there in his cloaked ship kind of waiting, and they can even kind of sense them, and Terran is kind of being too smart for his own good and moving his ship around in the pattern of this 3D chess game, the last game he played with Sarek. So Sarek is sure that that's him, that's where he's at, and he can even pinpoint, well, this is the next move he's going to make. And he decides that he's going to, they have one option, basically. They need to beam over, and they need to talk to Terran, and just kind of stop this from happening. And that's what they do. So Spock and Sarek figure out how they can beam over to a cloaked ship, and they're able to do that because, you know, they're awesome, they can do that. And they beam over, and they discover over there that Terran is actually a Vulcan, too. So these Romulans have been kidnapping Vulcans for years now, and then taking them to this Freeland planet, and kind of raising them to be attachés, and using them to influence people with mind control. Which, of course, for any regular Vulcan is completely unethical, but for these Romulan-influenced Vulcans, they're perfectly fine doing that. So Terran is kind of incensed that he's been challenged in this way, and that Sarek has kind of showed him up, and he challenges to a Cenapa duel. And I don't know if we've ever seen a centipod, but it's an ancient Vulcan weapon described as having like a moon-like cycle or a moon-like blade with a handle. So I think that it would either look like that, or that, something like that. I think. But so they get into this fantastic duel where you kind of get Sarek's big climax in the book, where even though he's this guy is kind of younger than him and he's probably has more skill at him with these weapons, Sarek is able to outwit him. And and these weapons are also poison too. So basically, you get cut, 3 cuts and you're dead. That's kind of the basic rule here. So they had this fantastic duel, and in the end, Sarek pulls out this move where he is able to flip it from one hand to the other, all the while kind of faking that he's old and he's not able to fully defend himself on one side. And he's able to get him, and he wins just outright. Terran wants to die, but Sarek won't have that. They beam him back to the Enterprise. McCoy is able to bring him back to life. And that's just the end of Chapter 9. And then after that, you get a tense space battle where you have all these Klingons coming in, and the Enterprise basically has no chance. So the ship that Terran was in, they joined forces with the Enterprise. So now you got Romulans fighting... Romulans and the Enterprise fighting side by side with these Klingons, and Kirk makes kind of one last plea, and he's like, these Klingons have no honor. How are you going to stand with them? And then one of the ships, who is actually Karaz, he joins forces too. So you got Romulans, Klingons, and the Enterprise fighting side by side, fighting off all of these ships. And there's too many; they're losing. But luckily, at the last moment, like the Klingon fleet comes in, scatters them, and they win. And they win the day. Hooray! Hey! So you got a space battle. You got a Vulcan battle. You've got a good old Edgar Rice Burroughs fight, Klingon versus human. This book has a little bit of everything. It's got drama. It's got intrigue. It's got a mystery. In the end, when they wrap things up, they do wrap it up kind of nicely. Valdir gets a job with the diplomatic corps. Camarang does himself in because he can't handle it. I took a lot of notes on this. Amanda's last journals give insight into her mind. They have a very strange sequence here I thought was kind of funny, but just a short sequence where Peter, of course, who's a cadet, and this is his Kobayashi Maru, and he, like his uncle, is able to pass his Kobayashi Maru. And I won't tell you how he does it, because it is kind of a fun little half chapter. But then I thought this was interesting, too, is the end of this book directly leads into the TNG episodes, Unification 1 and 2, where they have a conference on Kronos where Spock meets up with a Romulan senator named Pardek. So, pretty cool. The epilogue, of course, ends with Sarek spreading Amanda's ashes in their nice little garden. Throughout this whole book, I was thinking in my head, I thought that Amanda was alive in TNG. But no, Sarek had remarried in TNG, and that was Perrin. So, wow. I took a lot of notes on this. Final thoughts. It's kind of a slow start for the book, maybe, but given the nature, like the first 7 chapters are about her dying and kind of them dealing with that, and then also unraveling this mystery, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But then once it hits chapter 8, it's like, boom, and then it never stops. It just keeps going and going and going and going and going and going and going. The battle scene between Sarek and Terran, really well done, really cool. Peter and Karg's battle scene, also really well done. The way that she used the journals was really cool too, because she would do like a journal entry, which would be all like italicized on the page, and then that would lead directly into like Sarek's own memory of that occasion. So you got like her side and then his side, and it was all of these events, crucial events in their lives and Spock's life. So that was a really, really great way to kind of expand upon all that. So, Peter Kirk, what did his story add to it? And for me, I think it kind of, if they took him out, it would have taken away a lot of the kind of the punch to the story, because his story kind of added like a jolt to it. And like I said, it brought that feeling of like your classic Edgar Rice Burroughs hero. So I think that was really cool. It didn't take away from the Sarek aspect at all, and everything I think kind of just fit in, and it worked. And it also fit in and tied really well with all the movies and the TV. So man, really well done book. So I would recommend this for anybody who wants more backstory on Sarek. I keep holding this up. This is my journal. This is the book. This is the book. This is the book. Sarek by A.C. Crispin. Fantastic book. I read this in like 4 days, and I have so much to do too, but I had to squeeze it in because it was very, very good, and I wanted to see where it was going. So I would recommend it if you want to know more about Vulcans, more history of Sarek and Amanda and Spock's family and all that. Boy, as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I don't know where we're going after this, but there's lots and lots of great Star Trek books to read, so we'll see what's next. Everybody live long and prosper, and we'll see you next time. Bye.